this is a fantastic forum, and from what I understand about the group, I may be one of the sort of odd men out here in that I'm not a clinician, I'm not an engineer, but I certainly have spent a lot of time in my life around medicine, and I've got, I think, some tools in my toolkit that I've found can be really complementary to the skill sets that the folks here come to bear. So Dr. Trapello, my partner, is in the middle of a clinical case. We're doing a procedure at a hospital down in, I think, Georgia or Orlando right now. So he's got a very good reason for being late. I'm sure he'll hop on here momentarily, or in 15 minutes, or if it doesn't go well, maybe in 45 minutes. We'll see. But hopefully he's shortly to follow. But I will do this sort of as an act, or 3-act event. I'll talk a little bit about the backstory of how Dr. Trapello and I met and formed this company. I'll get into really the meat of what we're doing and what CoAPTech is, and then finally talking about the clinical trials sort of focus of the talk, getting into that topic and providing some some of our points of view and I hesitate to call it guidance, but some things we've learned. So if that sounds good with everybody, I will just dive on in. All right. My background, like I said, is in economics originally. And so how did I get into this field and wind up working at Hopkins and meeting Dr. Trapello and the entire thing? I got into medicine the hard way. I had some family experiences, various types, but the short version of it is my mom was an ovarian cancer patient, just to sort of start with the truth here. And she spent a lot of time when I was in high school and college interacting with the American medical system, and I did alongside her. So I got to see, inpatient, outpatient, ICU, the emergency room. I got to see home care. I got to see pharmacy, insurance, hospice, really the entire wheel of the American medical system. And I kind of learned what to me became, I think, some privileged information that not everybody realizes, which is, I think a lot of people from the outside looking in think our medical system is a super well-oiled machine. And our experience was that there was a lot of room for improvement, and people who were willing to roll up their sleeves and try to help make it better might have room to play and operate in that space. So I studied economics as an undergrad, didn't really know what I wanted to do, so it's a great major for that reason, just sort of general business fundamentals. But through these experiences I was having with my mom, I kind of thought to myself, there may be a place for me in medicine, and maybe I can help there. So I got a job which started out really just as an analyst at Johns Hopkins, helping to look at some projects that have been clinically successful in terms of quality or safety parameters, but they didn't really have a good handle on how those things impacted the bottom line. And obviously you want all three of those to come true. So I got brought in, started out just really looking at, spreadsheets and data and trying to match, hard dollars, soft dollars to some of the clinical improvements that Hopkins was demonstrating through a lot of brilliant ideas and programs they'd put in place. And I loved it. And the teams I was working with loved, and I'm glad to say this, we worked very well together, and I sort of took to it like a duck in water. So I was offered more and more opportunities with teams that were doing more and more exciting things, and eventually was running, or project managing, if you will, some of these teams. And I was working on a big project through the Armstrong Institute with a bunch of funding behind it from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. Gordon Moore is founder of Intel, Moore's Law. You're probably familiar. And we were working on this really big project, tracking best practices and adherence to things that we know in medicine, when done consistently and religiously, result in better outcomes, but things that aren't always done for various reasons. And anyhow, we were creating a system that could track and manage and help clinicians deal with the 200 things that they had to keep track of in their heads previously. And it was going well. And alongside of that, I met, and I was sort of Dr. Trapello's boss at the time. And he approached me and said, Howard, I've got something that I think you might want to take a look at. It might just, be something that piques your curiosity. Can you tell me what you think? And I said, what is it, Steve? And he said, well, it's a new way to put in feeding tubes. And that was sort of the, simple way he described it to me. And the world is just a funny place. My mom had a feeding tube in the last several years of her life. And I remember that being one of the therapies that really gave her some extra good quality time with our family. And I said, Steve, if you've got a better way to do these, I'm all ears. So I took a look at it. We went out to lunch. He sat me down. And I think we both approached that conversation and pretty much all of our interactions afterwards, very humbly in that, I'm not a clinician, I'm not an engineer. And I think he has found himself, we both have abilities to cross over, but, I think he's realized he's not a business person. And so we both have been able to help really complement one another. And as soon as I saw what he had, the economics of it really just jumped off the page at me as being so true that I thought this thing really could have potential. And so we formed the company in 2016, and it's been basically off to the races ever since then. We have had a kind of a rocket ride, a lot of ups and plenty of downs, but it's mainly gone well. And I'm a little superstitious, so I'll knock on wood, and I'll get into now more about CoAptech, and I'll touch on that story as we go. But really, so I kind of came at this from a couple different angles. One is, with some family background and some true belief in this and motivation. Two, from this team sense of Dr. Trapello and I having worked really well together at Hopkins, built a trusting relationship with each other. And then three, just, the belief in the potential here. And I guess to any of you, just broad strokes, thinking about doing something entrepreneurial, my advice to you, just to, get to the moral of the story first, and we can always, we'll come back to kind of how and why, but my advice to you is to just do it. It's never going to be a perfect time. It's never going to be, you're never going to have perfect information. It's never going to be easy. There's not, a magic solution to it. It's a lot of rolling up your sleeves, determining who and what to trust, and then going. It's very difficult to take action and to go, especially in the realm of uncertainty, which is the home base of startup land. So I'm going to dive in and talk about CoAptech now, but I'll just give that sort of emotional angle to it. It is scary. It was scary for both Dr. Trapello and I. He's got 5 kids, so I think it was scarier for him to take this leap than for me. But we dove in together, and it's been a really good team so far. And we've grown now as a company from just he and I at the onset to, I think we're hiring our 14th and 15th employee maybe in the next week or two. And we've just raised a new batch of capital to help support our growth. So things are going well. Let's talk about what we actually do here. So is that okay? Can everybody still with me? Okay, getting the thumbs up. I'm going to keep going. So first of all, you saw on the first slide, we're all about ultrasound. We'll talk about what ultrasound really is, I think, on the next slide. Yeah, but for now, I'll just start just like Dr. Trapello started. And he said to me, I've got a better way to put in feeding tubes. So we'll start there. What is a feeding tube? And a feeding tube is, and you guys probably know this, so I'll be quick. It's for patients who can't eat or swallow. A lot of different conditions these apply to. So cancer, stroke, many other reasons. You could be in the ICU, comatose, car crash, whatever. And you are typically given, if you need to have nutritional support for more than about a week or two, you get sort of a semi-permanent tube placed directly into your stomach. So these, go outside in, and you pump liquid nutrition through that to sustain your life if you've got reasons you can't get food down. So hugely common need across a variety of conditions, and not going away, right? Patients are getting older, patients are getting sicker. This is a area of medicine that's, these were invented in the 80s. This is, kind of old news, but they're more and more important. And there's a couple ways to do them in the world that all involve pretty complicated, surgeries or solutions. And what Dr. Trapello invented is the world's only way to do this procedure with ultrasound. And we'll talk about how, but first we need to talk about what ultrasound is. And you guys may know this, but you may not. I didn't realize this early on, but have learned a lot since. Ultrasound is now the #1 most used medical imaging modality in the world. There's more ultrasound scans every day than CT, MRI, X-ray, endoscope, laparoscope, whatever, you name it. There's more ultrasound scans. And that's because it's two things. One is doctors have been doing more and more and more things with it. You usually think of ultrasound, you think of babies, right? But doctors have been using it all over the body to look at vessels and organs, the heart, the brain, trauma assessments, all kinds of stuff. It's been traveling all over the body, and it's also been traveling all over the world because it's extremely non-invasive, it's extremely portable, it's extremely economical. It's about $2,000 for an ultrasound unit these days. So in a lot of areas of the world where they don't have super expensive, suites and C-arms and, specialists, radiologists and stuff, they've got ultrasound. And so ultrasound has really democratized medical imaging in a huge way. It's a big deal. But ultrasound has had pretty much an Achilles heel for its entire inception until Trapello. And so what that was is ultrasound has had, just due to physics, an inability to operate in hollow regions of the body. There's an expression in medicine that air is the enemy of ultrasound. And the reason for that is it sort of works like the way a dolphin, does echolocation underwater. You can send a sound wave or a sound signal out through a fluidic tissue and it'll bounce back and you can, form an image or, sense of distance. But when those sound waves hit a hollow cavity, they scatter and get lost and they don't come back to make a picture. So Dr. Trapello figured out a way to trick ultrasound machines into being able to look into hollow spaces of the body. And it turns out that's a really big deal because there are some pretty important parts of the body that are hollow or semi-hollow, including the stomach, the airway, the lungs, the pubic region, and some other pretty important parts. So a lot of organs which were previously offline for ultrasound are now being given the green light by this technology. So we'll get into the magic recipe on the next slide, but that's any questions about that, anybody? I don't know if that's all making sense, but just to say, yeah, we're gonna keep rolling. But ultrasound is a huge phenomenon in medicine all over the world, and we are sort of expanding its possibility set. And so here's what we do. And before I tell you how and all that jazz, okay, the two things that we hear when we tell doctors about this technology, most common and consistently, are, first of all, why the hell didn't I think of that? Like, it's very simple. It's true. It's sort of obvious in retrospect, but not in a legal patent obvious sense. It's very clever, but it's not insanely complex, and that's a good thing. And then two, doctors say, oh my gosh, you can do this with it, you can do that with it, you can do this other procedure, you can do this other organ thing. So it's really got a lot of variations on the theme that become possible once you get the core concept. So here it is. What we do is as I mentioned before, we trick or fool or we simulate a fluid-filled organ within that hollow cavity of the body. So in this image on the screen, you're looking at, in this case, the stomach, where you've got this, pink or orange or red region. I'm colorblind, but we that's a hollow region. If you were to take an ultrasound probe and shine it at the stomach today, you would just get a bunch of noise and black, back. You wouldn't really be able to see in there and see what you're doing. So what we do is we take these balloon catheters, and that's just a medical grade balloon with a tube attached to it. And those get fed into the stomach, so down through the mouth, down the esophagus, into the stomach, just pass the tube down. And right down the heart of that tube, where it overlaps with the balloon, is a magnet. And it's a pretty strong magnet. And then we take an even stronger big magnet on the outside of the body, and we put that on top of the tissue. And that will pull this balloon up to the anterior surface, or the top wall here of the stomach, right at that interface between the fluidic tissue and that hollow region. And the magnets kind of help squeeze a lot of the air out, because even little micro, bubbles of air can get in the way of the ultrasound signal. And then we can fill that balloon with fluid from a port on the outside of the body, just the tube that's hanging out the mouth in this case. And when you fill that balloon with fluid, you just can watch it light up under ultrasound. It goes from being, a dark area that you can't hit with your flashlight to now being able to see. And so this balloon basically gives the ultrasound waves a backboard to sound off of and come back and get you that image all the way into the stomach. And the cool thing about ultrasound is, with ultrasound, you can actually see through the tissue itself. So you can see every millimeter from the skin through the fat, through the muscle, if there's any organs in the way, because in this procedure, when we're placing feeding tubes, for example, we're going in with a reasonably sized needle into a pretty busy neighborhood, and you can hit things that you really don't want to hit. A lot of the conventional procedures to place a feeding tube do hit those things, like the liver, or the spleen, or the bowel, or colon, or whatever, because they can't see through the tissue. But with ultrasound, you can. So we've actually got a really neat safety advantage vis-a-vis this approach as well. And if you line up your ultrasound probe and you look at that balloon and you see, hey, actually there's some liver in the way here, you can take that external magnet and you can reposition it and drag it to another location. That balloon will follow, and then you can, find a totally safe path for that needle which is going in. So a really, really, really clever way to make ultrasound work in these new regions. And then, has these other advantages, like the ability to really, truly see where you're going and know that you're going safely into whatever these hollow organs you're doing. So yeah, this now allows ultrasound to work in the stomach, the lung, the airway, the pubic region. We're doing a test tomorrow of our tracheostomy device, which is an airway procedure in a cadaver lab here in Baltimore. So we talk, about all the R&D aspects of things, but that's it. It's very, very fundamental. I had an investor say, it's like you just stuck a Ziploc bag on the end of a, hose, and that is kind of like that. Yeah, it's a little more sophisticated, but it's pretty simple. It really does a nice job of a challenge that was previously just, taken as a default or a given, and now it does all these new, it allows all these new creative things to happen. So we, frankly, as a company, are trying to catch up with all these opportunities and ways that we can take this. We've got a lot. Oh, yep. Somebody asking a question?
Yeah, there's questions.
Great.
Are the relative sizes of the balloons in the stomach to scale there?
I don't think so. I think the balloon is probably somewhere between the size of a golf ball and a tennis ball in real life. So doctors have told us it's like hitting the biggest, juiciest vein you've ever seen with their needles. It's a pretty easy target. But we can make the balloons any size, right? You can, if you're going into the windpipe, or, the trachea, you can make the balloon a lot smaller. And doctors are used to hitting veins and, tiny vessels, so they can pretty easily get this balloon, we've found. Yeah, you can make it bigger, you can make it smaller, you can make it different shapes. One of the cool things in the airway we're doing is we've got a shape that's kind of, it's not a cylinder or a sphere. It's not gonna, because that actually would occlude the air or block the airway when you're doing the procedure. It's sort of, we're calling it the batwing balloon. It's got, anyway, sections which are part of the balloon, and then it's got open sections so that air can flow while you're doing the procedure up and down the airway. So you can do all kinds of neat things with the balloon as a result of that. The balloon is just, whatever you make it. It's really the concept of having a balloon, which you can fill with fluid and create this backboard for ultrasound to then let you operate in these particular areas. And when I say operate, I mean, you can do needles, you can infuse medications, you can do biopsies or, therapeutics, and anything where you can now see, you can do diagnostics, you can do all these different things. So it's really giving the ability to see into these places. And then, it's really just a function of your own creativity on what you can go and do with it. Were there other questions on it?
Yeah, there was one more. Do the magnets create a strong ultrasound reflection?
No, we haven't seen any interference from the magnets, which is really cool. We do see, so the internal magnet is a little bit echogenic, which means it sort of stands out a little bit on ultrasound, which is a good thing, because that helps you know, hey, I'm looking exactly at that balloon. And the balloon itself is quite echogenic also. So one thing we have found is that, ultrasound sometimes can be like looking at a magic eye or one of the, it's a little bit, you have to be able to read between the lines, or I'm trying to think of the term, but anyway, you have to be able to interpret what you're seeing with some degree of skill. But our balloon is pretty unmistakable. Like once you see it, that's it. And that's a very good thing. So you don't trick yourself into, sticking a needle into somebody's colon because you thought it was the balloon because it looked a little similar. So, but the magnets, so this gets into the clinical trials and some of the preclinical stuff. The magnets are pretty much the enabler of this procedure, and they were the FDA's biggest concern about this technology. And the way we found this out is, through you guys are probably learning about all this or know about this, but, the FDA is just a bunch of people, first of all. So, don't ever be too intimidated, but, they can be an intimidating agency. But it's just a bunch of people. And we set up a meeting with the FDA and the relevant group within to look at this technology. And what they initially came back with was a serious concern that the magnets were going to hurt patients, because they said everything else about this procedure, tubes and balloons and needles and guide wire, that's all standard stuff in medicine. Everybody, we stick needles into patients all day long. But the magnets, we haven't quite seen that before. That might cause, the pressure between the internal and external might really harm the tissue in this, region of the stomach. And, we pushed back and said, we chose the stomach because it's a pretty sturdy organ. You can get a bullet shot in the stomach and you'd be okay, but that argument didn't go very far. What we then talked about with them was, guys, they had recommended a 10-patient study on 5 thin and 5 obese patients, just to sort of look at the, both sides of the curve. And we said to them, and this was a little risky, but we said to them, so you're telling us we don't know what this is going to do in patients, but you want us to put it in 10 humans, which is going to give you very little statistical evidence, right, that this is actually safe. 5 patients on a skinny patient is nothing. And secondly, we're going to be almost having like an ethical issue here because we really don't know if this is going to hurt people, and you're telling us to go put it in. So instead, we proposed to the FDA, what if we did this instead? What if we built humongous magnets? So like we built these magnets that were like the size of a brick, and we put them on live animals, and we found the animal model that was closest to the human stomach anatomically. Unfortunately, that was a dog model, so we had to do these tests in live dogs, but we tried to hurt these poor dogs with these giant magnets, and we left the magnets held on and coapted together for about an hour, which is like 10 times as long as the procedure typically takes, and the magnets are in place. And we couldn't hurt the dogs. And we said to the FDA, we don't think that, we think the dogs are going to be fine from this. We don't think, it's going to hurt the stomach. But if we can show this extreme safety factor demonstration, like if you look at, pressure and time and the area under the curve, it was like a 30x factor, relative to our production device, would that meet your concern and satisfy that adequately? And they said yes. So we went and did it, and the dogs tolerated the magnets, the giant magnets, beautifully. And we really kind of threaded the needle with the FDA. And this, Chuck, this is where I think I mentioned to you, this got really interesting for us because the FDA actually let this device get approved without a prerequisite set of clinical trials, meaning human studies. So we got onto the market with just this crazy animal data, but no human work whatsoever. So we had to then, most companies do it the other way around, right? You have your clinical studies, which lead to your FDA approval. But that is, for a company and a young growing startup, that is a lot more complex of a pathway because it costs a lot more money to do your clinical trials. It introduces a lot of risk to your device's approval. If something happens in the clinical trial and you need to redo it or something shakes out, and and that FDA approval is such a valuable milestone for the growth of a company that we said, you know what, if we can go for that without having the, human live medical setting stuff in place and they'll let us, we are going to go for that. And we're going to have to deal with it on the other end, which is kind of where we are now, where, just because we're FDA approved, doctors aren't going to buy this thing and use it in their patients if there's no human data, right? So we're now having to go get all the human data, but we're able to do it with a lot better foundation, right? We've got our feet underneath it. We've got our FDA approval. We've got investors now lining up because they say, oh my gosh, this thing is legit. It's got FDA approval. All this preliminary work has been fantastic. And so we kind of put the cart before the horse, but it was, we think, we kind of think it was quite clever to go for that approach. Now, it could have backfired. They could have said, no, we're not going to do the dogs, but you're right about 5 patients having no statistical validity. Why don't you go do 50 in each arm? That would have been a pretty expensive meeting if it had gone that way. So it was a little bit of a gamble, but we felt like we had a good argument. We felt like we had a good suggestion, and they were very reasonable. And so we're talking now about the clinical work we're doing, but that's really how our clinical and regulatory strategies tied together early on. It was sort of this creative approach, which was a little bit unorthodox, but really paid off.
Was this a PMA?
No, this was 510K. And so the 510K path, for those who don't know, is where you sort of say that you're like a device that's already on the market. Now, you have to be careful with that because you don't want the branding of being, just like something else, and you don't want, legal when you get into a patent fight and they say, well, you said you were just like this other thing. That can get ugly, but for the sake of getting a efficient approval done, it's a very good option if you have something that you can point to and say you are similar to. And we had a pretty clever approach there as well. The procedure that we pointed to and said we're a lot like that device certainly is not an ultrasound gastrostomy thing because there's nothing else that can do it this way. But there's a device for a procedure called a Gastropexy, where you drill into the stomach with a bunch of different needles and put in these anchors, and you sort of pull manually, you like yank the stomach up towards the abdomen, and you do that with these lines and anchors and stuff. And we said, FDA, our device is doing a very similar thing here. It's just bringing the stomach up to the surface, but it's a much safer temporary gastropexy. It's not a permanent one where you're putting in these anchors and yanking the thing around. It's just a temporary gastropexy with magnets. And they said, you know what, that's exactly the kind of thing we like. It's a similar mechanism of action in the body, but accomplished with a very different way. That'll work for your 510K. So it was great. We got, we sort of fished our wish with the FDA, and we were able to get approved and on the water, on the market, pretty early in the grand scheme of things. So that has been great. It's allowed us to grow and raise money and begin now getting this procedure out there far and wide, which is kind of where we are. But I'll keep moving. There's a quick video on the screen here, which you can go on the website and check out. It's just a few minutes if you're curious just about how this thing actually works in the body. We just feed it down into the stomach. You put the external magnet on, fill the balloon, and then you go in with a needle. You can follow up on it. It's on our website. But that's all just to say, the device is now approved and it's now being marketed by Coaptech on our website and around the world through a bunch of other means at the moment. So let's talk about why this actually is a big deal. Not just because you can do it, but like, should you do it, with this way? And here's the big change in medicine about this. In today's world, if you want to put a feeding tube in, you need to, because most patients who need a feeding tube, that need is kind of identified when they're in the ICU, which is, sort of critical care area. Right now, you probably are hearing a lot about ICUs. It's sick patients, and the, lack of an ability to eat or swallow sort of is very common there, and that need becomes evident in that environment. So those docs, though, in today's world, by and large, like the vast majority of them, aren't the doctors who can put in a feeding tube. So they are taking care of the patient. They know all about the patient. They are doing all these other things on the patients. They're putting in central lines. They're putting it, they're doing paras and thoras and all these other things for the patient. They're even doing airway tubes, but they can't do feeding tubes. They just don't have a tool that allows them to do feeding tubes. So they have to call their colleagues in gastrointestinal surgery or interventional radiology, or, they have to call a busy specialist and say to them, hey, can I get Mary Smith down to your operating theater for a procedure, your suite? And those docs say, yeah, sure, I'm like very busy. I've got a lot of better things to do than this, but if you want to squeeze her in, we can try for 3 days from now or whatever. Because it's not an emergency procedure, right? It's not a sexy new procedure. It's not a super lucrative procedure for those specialists to do. So they're not jumping out of their boots to do these. And what typically happens is it's the last thing on the slots for the day, and then it gets bumped to tomorrow, and then it's bumped. So it can take days and days and days and days for that whole orchestration to take place. And then, once they say, okay, we've got a window, you can come do it, the ICU has to pack up a super sick patient and put them on like mobile, monitoring and then get them safely down to the suite. There's a handoff between teams, which we know in medicine is, a point where errors can happen. Then the person has to have their operation in the suite, and then they have to pack them back up, get them back up to the ICU. It's a big runaround and introduces a lot of risk, introduces a ton of extra time. And in the ICU, time is money. It's pretty much the most expensive place you can hang out in a hospital. So the big contrast here, and the reason I left Hopkins to be a part of this company, and the reason I think the economics are such a big deal, is this procedure is empowering those ICU doctors, so the frontline guys, to do this procedure themselves and cutting out all the middlemen. And so in the new world, which we're bringing online, they just say on Tuesday, this guy needs a feeding tube. And then 30 minutes later, they say, okay, we're going to put the feeding tube in, and they get our kit off the shelf. And then 30 minutes later, it's done, and the patient's, on their way. So this is, and feeding tubes often are a requirement before the patient can leave the ICU or leave the hospital. So we really think this is going to improve patient flow and getting patients home and out of the ICU, which is expensive and risky for patients to be in, a lot sooner. So it's sort of a power to the people concept. The analogy I make is like, if in today's world if you needed to change a light bulb, if you had to call a handyman and wait 4 days for that guy to get there, and then you get a bill for $600 in the mail, versus if you got to change the light bulb and you just have a light bulb on your shelf, you just take it out and put it in yourself, you're never going to call that handyman again. Like it would be crazy for you to do that. And so we think, therefore, that this procedure can become the default, like the gold standard for feeding tube placement. And that's why it's such a big deal. Not just because you can do it with ultrasound, but like what that actually means is these frontline docs can take care of this and the suites don't have to. Everybody wins. The suites can do better things with their expensive time. The frontline docs don't have to deal with that whole rigmarole, and the patients are getting home sooner. So it's a really good sort of solution, and we're now seeing this come true. We've got hospitals now where this has become their default method, their gold standard, pretty much like their one and only, because again, you just don't need to call those guys anymore for the help. So very exciting, very, very good economic story to tell here, a lot of efficiency gains and all that. And as we talked about, we think it's safer for a lot of good reasons. So any questions about that? And then, what you're seeing here, guys, just for some context, is this is kind of like a pitch deck. It's half presentation for, talking about the procedure. It's half sort of pitch deck. So I can share this if folks want. This is something we were out raising money recently, and we were using a deck a lot like this one. So just trying to tell the story, trying to give, some comparisons and some reasons to believe our procedure is attractive in a big way, and trying to kind of message, as it were, not just be kind of techie and truthful, but be a little bit marketing of yourself in some regard. So this has a little bit of that polish to it. And I'm just checking real quick. Has Dr. Trapello joined yet? I just want to see what his status is. Let me do a quick check-in.
No. Okay. Yeah, you want to check?
Yeah, I'm just gonna see how he's doing. And then I'm gonna keep moving, just making sure he's got the link and everything. Okay, so in the aim of time, let's keep at it. The other thing about our procedure is it's sort of like peanut butter and jelly with another common procedure, which is called a tracheostomy. It's breathing tube placement. So breathing tube placement is another very common need in ICUs. And when you do a breathing tube and a feeding tube together at the same time, you save a ton of money because you sort of eliminate all the recovery time between those two procedures. In today's world, those two procedures, it's very difficult to do them together because they're done by two different teams. And in our world, we're going to be able to make that happen every time, where those two procedures are done back to back. So within the same dose of sedation, within the same hour, the patient can get their breathing tube and their feeding tube. Super big impact, really exciting. So, and then here's a slide, and I'll be quick through some of these, but this is just looking at kind of big picture market opportunity on the right-hand side. That's kind of the focus that I want to get folks to look at, is all the other things we can do with this device. So there's the feeding tube placement stuff, but then there's all these other procedures too, putting in tubes into the bladder, tubes into the airway, like I talked about, other parts of the GI system. And this is just, some of the things we've come up with to date. There's probably a bunch more. And so we believe this is a platform technology that has a lot of different angles and applications to it. And, we think it's a pretty attractive big picture to look at. So here's kind of here's where we are today. We have done all this work just in the past couple of years with a pretty lean and mean team. A lot of our funding has come from grants, which I'm sure all of you, are familiar with. And if you're not, it's a good thing to get familiar with. It's a lot of work, but they're free money to support whatever project you might be working on in or out of the university setting. And so we received our clearance in 2019. So it was 3 years on the nose, I guess, from when we formed the company to getting clearance. That's pretty quick. That's pretty quick from being an idea in a garage to being an approved device for putting in live patients. We've got 5 patents now granted, a bunch more in the hopper and pending. We now have, I think it's probably 12 or 15 clinical sites using. We've done 250 procedures. I think these decks go out of date kind of quickly because we're growing. And so far, again, knocking on wood, no device-related events. So this is happening all over the hospital, not just in the ICU. It's now happening in LTACs, which are actually like outpatient ICUs, sort of as a way to think about them. And again, the point just being anywhere you've got ultrasound, you can do this procedure. So we're really excited to do things like we have a team that's looking at doing a study in Haiti, so some of the more austere environment stuff, that you might be able to accomplish with this technology. And in terms of capital, before the round we recently did, we'd raised about $6 million. I think 1 or 2 of that was probably $2 million. That was from NIH. We just raised $8 million more, and then we also just got another $1.6 million from the NIH to bring this device to pediatrics. In pediatric patients, one of the common ways they put feeding tubes in uses ionizing radiation, which is exceedingly bad for young tissue. It can lead to cancer at elevated rates for kids. So our solution with just ultrasound hopefully can reduce that problem or eliminate it, which is a big deal to the NIH. So we're excited about that. These are hospitals that are using it, some other, stuff. Again, this is more for the pitch deck stuff. We've got some quotes from users and quotes from the NIH and stuff, just sexing it up a little bit. And then this is the first team that ever did it actually here in Baltimore. This is at a hospital called Baltimore Washington Medical Center. And they've been, they're affiliated with the University of Maryland system. They've been a fantastic partner. They've done, I don't know, now probably 75 of these or something. And they are really, really pushing the envelope forward with the procedure and with the technology. So this gets, Dr. Montague, to your questions about clinical trials and stuff. So we have taken kind of a hybrid approach, because since we got our FDA approval in 2019, we have had certain sites that have wanted to study this device, and we've had others that have said, we're not really set up for big studies. We just want to use it on our patients, which is great. And they've said, we'll take it slow. We'll go one step at a time, but we're not really here to run a clinical trial about it. We just want to do it for our hospital. And this is a good example of that. So Baltimore Washington Medical Center, they sort of said, what, we're confident in it. We'll try it. Let's go. And at the same time, had said, we don't really want to do much research on it. Other sites have said, we really want to trial it, research it to, high heaven. And we don't know if we're going to buy it ever or not, and so we've had to balance those two things, because we have investors now, and clinical research certainly is going to help bring this technology further and wider. And at the same time, we got ourselves into this, into this pickle, but we need to start showing revenue growth in order to keep growing as a company, because we've got our approval. And if you're approved, but you don't have any sales for, 3 or 4 years, that starts looking a little funny. So we're kind of doing both of these at the same time, and they're feeding back into one another, right? All the things we're learning through research are feeding into our commercial sites. Some of our commercial sites have, pivoted and said initially, hey, we just wanted to look at this thing and use it. Now we've got this huge repository of data on this. Can we do some research? And we said, well, great. If it's good, if it's good data, let's get it out there. So that's all just to say there's not really one way to go about this, one flavor of, first you do your design, and then you do your, V&V, and then you do your clinical work, and then you do, we've really kind of blended these things, and it's certainly been messy and a lot to manage, but I think it's been effective. So that is where we are. This is a little bit of something else that I'd mention. If you're building a company, you really need to think of it, or I would recommend you really think of it as building a big bus, right? You can always try to keep it, skinny, and like I said, lean and mean is good. But we've got, and we've had help from a number of incredible advisors. We've got a great board. We've got a lot of support out in the ecosystem. And I would just say, when we started with this, we were nervous. We were unsure, going out and telling this story that I've just told you about our belief in this technology, to all these people. But many of them believed exactly what we believed, and some of them even placed a bet on us, and that's been really rewarding and really something that we value a ton. And the only way to kind of get that is to put it out there, right, and get that feedback. And I remember there's a group called TEDCO, which some of you might be familiar with here in the state. I'm looking at the time. We put in our first TEDCO grant probably at the end of 2016. It was for $150,000. That was going to be the first money into the company. And we bombed. I mean, we didn't just like miss it by a hair. We struck out. And it was because we kind of, felt like we knew everything and we were these Hopkins guys and we were just going to mail it in. And that was not the right approach. And so we had to come back kind of with our hat in our hands and really put in the work to make the grant sing and to make the story really good and clear. And they challenged us, and we worked our tails off to respond to that challenge. And that was very helpful to us. And so I would just say also, one of the things you're going to do if you take this route is you're going to stumble, and some of this is cliche, right? But for good reason. One of the biggest things is just learning from those stumbles and continuing to go. You just have to go. So I'm going to pause and say we've got like 10 minutes for Q&A, and I can talk about clinical work happening. I can talk about any more about the company. I don't know if Trapello ever made it on or not, but one of his 5 children could have needed him. That's a valid excuse too, or he might still be in that clinical case. I hope not, but we will see.
Howard, thank you so much. Let's get a round of Zoom applause.
Oops.
Oh, Chuck, can I ask the first question?
Oh, okay. Go ahead. I've got one too, but you can ask.
Thank you, Howard. That was a great case example of the story that you told. It didn't follow sort of a what I would call a more typical path through regulatory. That was really interesting. Really nice example. It's nice to see some familiar faces here. Lots of Hopkins input on this as well on this slide.
Indeed.
Yes, my question maybe goes back to the TEDCO stuff. Can you comment on, like, when you went to build your first prototype, right? And there was the concept, but you went to actually build the prototype. Did you work with an engineering company? Did you work with student design teams? How did you go about that?
Great question. Yeah, so the long answer is we've done it all, and over time we've taken advantage of student design teams, free or cheap, engineer partner, sort of prototype shops, and then expensive, really sophisticated engineering partners. And we work with everybody at different sort of levels. But the original product that Dr. Trapello sort of put together was him and a doctor just coming up, just dissecting a device that was already out there and kind of kludging this together in their garage, and then testing it on like a gelatin, sort of mold, and just making sure the concept was viable. And that was a big step. Obviously you need to know that before you jump in. And then we built some, I'll call them like medium grade prototypes with a company in town called Route 3 Labs. And there are a number of these groups in town that can, for a little bit of money, not long dollars, can put together some pretty good quality, things that will allow you to take that next step forward in testing and verifying that something is feasible. So I think with those, we were able to support testing the device in the cadaver lab. The state of Maryland anatomy lab is extremely affordable, and if you want to really know if something is going to be viable in a human anatomy, cadavers are a really good way to do it. We're going in tomorrow for some more work. It's gross. It's there's a moment of respect. It's a complicated set of, it's smelly. Like the day is weird, but you can learn so much from really testing stuff. And I would recommend everybody, if you've got something, and you want to move it forward in a substantial way, you do it in your garage and all that. You can 3D print it. You get it, get something that you think can work, and then go put it in a real body, and you'll learn what is and isn't actually working pretty well from that. So that was kind of, a lot of these early stepping stones really, gave us a ton of information and a ton of confidence. And if you say to an investor, I've got an idea, they're like, great. You know what I mean? But if you say to an investor, I've got a working prototype that I've done in a cadaver, and the difference between those two states is like $2,000 worth of, time and money and effort, not crazy difference, but like the proof, that you come at that conversation with is much higher. And you say, I've done it successfully in a cadaver and I want to go put it in a dog and I need $80,000. That is a much more effective conversation. So I would say you're always trying to, you're really just trying to figure out what's that next value inflection point, what's that next milestone, and then laser focus on getting there. You don't really need to know how you're getting from A to Z, but if you can just say, we're going from A to B, and we're going to, hit it hard, and we're not going to try to boil the ocean, but we're going to get from A to B. Yeah. The other thing I'm a big fan of is placing parallel bets. So in startup land, you never know what's going to work and what isn't. So if we have to design, a specialized guide wire or something for this thing, I will say to the team, rather than take approach number 1 and then that fails, and then approach number 2 and that fails, and then approach number 3 and then approach number 4, we're going to do all 4 of these in parallel, not in sequence, and we're going to spend a little bit more money, but we're going to save a ton of time. Speed is the only advantage I feel like a startup has in the world. And so you have to, my personal belief is to put everything on speed and learn quick, fail quick, succeed quick. All of that comes from that mindset of we're just going to go. And that parallel bet strategy can help you just go a lot quicker. So my team's always like, it's more expensive to do it this way. And the answer is, it's actually, it's certainly not. You know what I mean? Like, you are paying more upfront, but you are saving a ton of time, and you're getting to that answer a lot quicker, and you're going to keep moving. So anyhow, just a couple tricks of the trade.
That last point gets to the, you want to fail fast. That's really important. But a lot of what you said there, I think the clinical innovators, take note, right, on how you realize that same prototype. You have that idea, that first prototype, that first milestone. You have a concept in your mind, but the design teams and groups like Route 3 and so forth say, let me just add my congratulations to what Yusuf Yazdi wrote in the chat. You probably know Yusuf is faculty in biomedical engineering, and he heads the CVID design teams. Speaking of design teams, he says, congrats on a simple, elegant solution that brings real value to all. Thank you, Howard.
Yeah, no, great suggestions. Great suggestions on translation. If any of the attendees here want to unmute and ask a question, and I'll also point out that I put a webinar survey on. So if before you leave, if you could just take a moment to click in the chat and take the survey, it just takes only 2 minutes. So let's find out. We want to find out who you are and what ideas you have. But if you have any questions, please unmute and ask Howard yourself. And while they're waiting, I have one. You mentioned that was the MII program you applied for early on from TEDCO, right, Howard?
Correct.
What lessons did you have which you would help the academics that are in the audience here? What did you realize that, oops, we don't know this, and we've got to focus on this?
A couple things. One is, having Hopkins on your resume only gets you so far. Like I said, we just weren't quite good enough, with what we brought in. 2, the business things that you probably aren't going to know the answer to, at least to this audience, are like eminently solvable and figure outable. You just need to put the work in to go solve them and figure out. But there are very, very, very few business problems that don't have a solution. So I would say those grant doors, certain groups, the NIH is a good example, they aren't quite as concerned about the business angles of whatever, interesting technologies are being developed. But a lot of the others that are in the sort of entrepreneurial and startup ecosystem really are. And so you can't just come in with a good idea and expect that there's going to be interest and traction and so forth. If you don't know how you're going to actually get it all the way to the market, folks are going to be able to sniff that out. And I've never had the answer that I talked about from going from A to B be laughed out of the room, because I've said, we don't know the answer to all of the questions you're asking, but I can tell you we know the next thing we need to do is this, and from there it's probably going to look like either this or that, but I'd be lying to tell you I can promise it's going to go one way or another. But we found that the business side of the ecosystem, it does like you to know some about business. If you're just a smart scientist or, talented doc, I would recommend either you really bone up quick, and there's a ton of, stuff you can get free on the internet, or, I think with Dr. Trapella and I, we sort of said, you know what, we're not going to own each other's domains. We're going to partner up here. And if you can find somebody who has some of that information, who's willing to roll up their sleeves and work really hard on, a dream or a project that you might have conceived, that approach can also really get you pretty far. And, two minds are better than one kind of thing. So, but I would say, yeah, I was a little surprised that some of the grant and some of the opportunities that are out there for startups really have that business angle kind of front and center. They want to know how this thing's going to get to market. I think they've probably gotten burned and invested in lots of technologies that sounded promising from a idea concept, but stage, but not didn't have a follow through on a path. And so that was a good lesson to learn early.
Well, that's good. Well, certainly MII is like that. Tech Ventures has several programs that are like that. And I just want to throw out the offer that if there's anybody in BME here that's applying for that, that's part of what I do here in BME. I will also help a little bit, those of you who aren't in BME, if we like you and that, but if I have time. But certainly BME, that's my job here, is to do that. And, Tech Ventures has programs that, like you say, Howard, are also very focused on getting the business aspect. It's not just a good idea. NSF SBIRs are also more focused. NIH, yes, a little more flexible. But,
yes.
But yeah,
I'm glad you gave that selfless plug, because I was going to give that plug for you.
Oh,
that's really true. I mean, if you're wondering about the funding landscape through things like MII or even SBIRs, yeah, contact Chuck. He knows the landscape as well or better than anybody, and especially the kind of local ecosystem for entrepreneurial, innovation-oriented funding.
Yeah, and I'm not a paid friend, but I fully agree with that. Chuck knows it inside out and sideways. You would be well advised to spend some time with him.
Well, thank you, Brian. Anybody else have questions or comments? I'll ask one more. It's 5 o'clock. I know people are going to leave, but if you please take the survey before. But you had mentioned, Howard, that physicians wanted to see clinical trials, and you're seeing what sort of reception are you getting now of where they want to see peer-reviewed journals or whatever, but you're finding some that are adopting it right away. Can you talk about the adoption, market acceptance there?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag, and I think it's there's technology adoption life cycle curves that are out there that say there are a lot of innovators and early adopter folks who are going to try new stuff, whether it's proven to a high degree or not. And so those are the folks we're spending a lot of time with these days. Those are the folks who, buy a Tesla before it's even on the market. They put in their subscription to get one. They buy the new technologies when they come out to check them out and to learn and to, when things work, to be at the front, make their lives easier. But most of the market is in the middle part of the bell curve that really needs the evidence, especially in medicine. Obviously, evidence is king. And so that's where we are. We've got a bunch of good doctors and hospitals on that early end using it and giving us great feedback and telling us, it's really good, but you want to optimize or, fix this little thing or whatever. So we're doing all that, getting it ready to do two things. One, be usable by a broader set of users, because that early group of users tend to be a little bit more sophisticated, batch of users. They're good at tech stuff, but we want this to work for any doc. We want it to be, you know, so easy a caveman can use it, you know, and simultaneously that big fat part of the bell curve, you know, those guys need the data. And so really good thing though is by virtue of getting out there and sharing this and having the opportunity to market it and get, you know, a little bit of buzz going about it and a couple early little publications of, you know, the first 5 cases or the first 20, you know, nothing, you know, pivotal, but good early, you know, pilot stuff that has now set us up. And we've had some of the best researchers in the world, like right up this alley, coming to us and saying, hey, we want to do the RCT here. We want to do your pivotal trials. So it's been really cool. We haven't had to go find them and beg them to do this. They've come to us and said, we want to prove this thing is the new gold standard. Here's how we're going to do it. We've done things like this before. You know, they're really qualified teams. And so that's the stage we're at. We've just raised a bunch of money to do that, which is a heavy lift, right? I mean, you know, to come out and prove something definitively is better than anything else is hard. And especially so when the current standards have been around for 30 or 40 years. So we really need to be better. And we're going to be, but it's been exciting. And then at some point we're going to, you know, I believe have evidence showing this is a technology that the world can adopt. And then it's really just a function of getting it to the people. So then you're talking about big sales and distribution and everything else, but we're still in that stage now of, you know, the big next step for us. You know, I was talking about what's that next big milestone for, you know, you're always thinking that. Our next big milestone is a published randomized trial showing this against a procedure called PEG, which is the current endoscopic gastrostomy approach, and showing that we're safer or as safe, and we're saving a ton of money for hospitals, and we're getting patients home quicker. So yeah, we're not excused from that hard work. That's actually exactly where we are today. But we have had the opportunity to get this out there far enough to some of the early thinkers on it and the early users, such that it I think that also had a nice benefit of setting us up to have really great investigators and, you know, people looking at our you know, randomized trial. I think we're in good hands there. And on the pediatric side, man, we've got teams. We've got a team. It's like a trifecta of Children's National, CHOP, and New York Pres. We've got like the top docs in the world in pediatric, you know, for looking at our pediatric device. So it's really good. Once you start getting some wind in your sails, it actually, you know, it can take you a lot further than you even, you know, you would hope. So yeah, that's again why you just want to get it out there. You know, you can't expect it to be perfect up front. And if we had tried to do a big RCT, you know, 18 months ago, or it very well may have not worked out too well. So one step at a time.
Well, good. Well, with that, it's over time. If there's one last question, we can take one from the audience. But if not, there is applause there coming from all those muted attendees that are still there. Howard, thanks very much. It was a great example of just what it takes to get a medical device, and including the foresight of where you're going. So thanks so much.